nationalists continue shelling residential areas of Donetsk. This time they struck the center of the city once again. There is not a single military position around here, but plenty of hospitals and shops. Now, this bus was struck. This is where 3 people were wounded. You can see the blood is still on the ground. Now, the victims are now in a nearby hospital where another shell had landed. As for the bus itself, well, not a single window is intact. Now, this is where shell fragments struck the passenger bus. It then proceeded on another 20-25 meters, just rolled on. But the point of impact itself was in this apartment building. As you can see, the cars are also without windows, so that means shell fragments are absolutely everywhere. Now, this is one of the busiest streets in Donetsk. It's right in the center of the city. There's quite a lot of transportation routes. Now, there are quite a lot of shops, and as I said, there are hospitals here as well, schools and kindergartens. So absolutely, purely working on the scene. Ukrainian nationalists might have used cluster munition, which is designed to inflict as much damage as possible. Now, they're saying that this could have been a 152 millimeter caliber weapon. This strike by Ukrainian artillery took place just after 10 a.m., right after this store opened its doors for customers. Now, the fragments of the shell flew absolutely everywhere. Take a look at these holes in the walls. Miraculously, no one was killed in this attack. However, the owner of the store said that fragments of the shell hit his clothes, and this is his account of what had happened.
We were 4 more explosions nearby. The fragments flew towards us. You can see 4 more explosions nearby. The fragments flew towards us. You can see them everywhere. It pierced through everything. While we were running, a piece of shrapnel hit my jacket. It's a miracle I survived.
Thankfully, no one was killed in this particular instance. 3 people are now in the hospitals being treated for their wounds. However, over the last 24 hours, at least 3 civilians have been killed in Donetsk People's Republic, and multiple were wounded by Ukrainian artillery shelling. Roman Kosarev, RT, Donetsk Republic.
Meanwhile, in the Kherson region, officials there say the Ukrainian forces attacked an administrative building in the city of Golaya Pristan. All right, so the Turkish president says his country will now create a gas hub whose purpose is one main idea, that is to deliver Russian gas back to people in Europe.
While many countries, including in Europe, are preparing to limit energy use in the coming winter, we don't worry about that. Turkey is becoming a gas and energy hub. Energy exports to Europe will be carried out through our territory. Let everyone who criticizes us for a balanced policy during the crisis between Russia and Ukraine take an example from us.
Well, the news comes as Europe is planning to pay enormous sums to save its citizens from high energy prices. According to some estimates, European governments plan to allocate more than 600 billion euros to subsidize consumers. Now, Germany tops the charts with plans to shell out more than 260 billion. But all that comes against a background of soaring inflation in the Eurozone, which has been breaking all-time records each and every month. That has certainly seen some European politicians call for a rethinking of the anti-Russia sanctions.
Germany should look to Russia once this war is over. What's at issue is that we should be able to ensure industrial production. We depend on a competitive price for gas. My viewpoint is that won't work just with LNG. We need more diplomatic initiatives, talks.
It's finally time to appear in the EU and say, these sanctions harm us much more than Putin. Our people have to foot the bill for them. If you were honest, you would have to say to the population, we can't do without this Russian oil and gas for a long time.
Meanwhile, in Austria, the only major political party calling for an end to the sanctions against Russia is now leading in several September. And we did speak to the Freedom Party's former head, Heinz Christian Temper. And we did did speak to the Freedom Party's former head, Heinz Christian Strache, who also served as the Austrian Vice-Chancellor for 2 years, on what he thinks about the current challenges facing Europe.
We're seeing that the sanctions decided on damage oneself and cause harm to our Austrian population when we renounce oil, when we renounce gas, even though there are valid binding contracts, and yet payments have to be made, even though we're practicing this renunciation. If this leads to shortages in gas, but also in electricity, then this can lead to dramatic developments, which we are already blackout, to the situation where it can get cold in winter, to a situation where the industrial companies, the businesses, can perhaps only produce for a few hours, and the people, yes, can perhaps only produce for a few hours, and the people, yes, could become unemployed and experience price increases that they can no longer afford, and this could lead to a new mass poverty. These are all the developments that are obviously not being thought through, and of course one must ultimately blame those in political power for such developments. On the one hand, it is dramatic that we have to experience a war in the middle of Europe, in this case in Ukraine, and that we have a conflict situation where actually every rational and responsible person should do everything to contribute to peace and negotiations. And we're now witnessing a situation in which the European Union, without discussing the reasons and the underlying reasons, has taken a stance on the matter and is not advocating negotiations and the path of negotiation, but is evidently favouring the supply of weapons and further escalation, and is also pursuing a policy of sanctions to the detriment of its own citizens in the European Union. And that makes the whole situation extremely dangerous, because instead of relaxation, there is a further escalation, and I think we have to ease the tension and look for solutions on how we can ensure peace in Europe and in Ukraine. Well, I can only say that I hope that all sides involved are so rational that this will never be the case, but we have to take the development of the war that we're currently witnessing in Ukraine into account. And yes, we're talking about a war of aggression by Russia, but it has a history and underlying reasons. The underlying reasons are a coup on Maidan in 2014, the events before 2014, including the European Union-Ukraine Association Agreement. At that time, as an opposition leader of the Freedom Party, I demanded that Russia should be brought into a common table to discuss common interests with the European Union and Ukraine to find a good, sustainable common path. Unfortunately, this was not Victoria Nuland and her famous statement, which was uttered during an intercepted telephone conversation. I'm quoting her now. The EU telephone conversation. I'm quoting her now. The EU. That was a topic, and then we had to witness a civil war that lasted many years, resulting in 10,000 deaths in Ukraine, and the European Union did not get involved as a party of peace. These are many developments without justifying anything, but one must understand the underlying reasons. And also NATO's eastward expansion, which ultimately led to this escalation. This is not dismissing any responsibility, but we must understand the underlying reasons, and we have also experienced wars such as in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, and also in Serbia, where one did not act in accordance with international law.
WikiLeaks has published the very moment that Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State and ex-CIA chief, was served with a lawsuit as he attended an event in Ohio. Have a look at this.
Well, we are claiming that their Fourth Amendment rights were violated, that their private information was surveilled by the U.S. government, along with private information was surveilled by the U.S. government, along with dozens of others, when they went to the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Essentially, they are arguing they were spied on without proper justification, had their rights violated, had their rights violated, had their personal information accessed by the government without due process. This is what they put forward in their lawsuit.
Prior to their visits, each visitor was required to surrender his or her electronic devices, smartphones, and laptops to the employees of UC Global. Unbeknownst to each of these visitors, and without their consent, employees of UC Global, acting without the knowledge of the Ecuadorian government, copied the information stored on the devices. UC Global then provided that information to the defendant United States Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, then headed by defendant Michael Pompeo.
Now, they are calling for damages as a result of the stress and anxiety they suffered from having their personal information violated, their privacy essentially violated by American intelligence and the CIA. Now, it's important to note that UC Global, the firm that is mentioned in the lawsuits, and former employees of UC Global have come forward. And former employees of UC Global have come forward and confirmed that they were indeed bugging and spying on Julian Assange and his associates. There is testimony from former UC Global employees. They were investigated in Spain. Now, it's interesting to note that the lawsuit specifically talks about Mike Pompeo and his role as CIA director. According to reports, he was obsessed with Julian Assange. He even had sketches made about possible methods of assassinating Julian Assange. The civil rights attorney who is representing the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, she gave specific comments regarding the former CIA director, Mike Pompeo.
If a foreign journalist can be prosecuted for publishing factual documents, then no journalist is safe. And apparently Mike Pompeo believes that attorneys representing journalists should not be safe either. These actions
to Mike Pompeo on the very same day that the current U.S. Secretary of State was tweeting out, about support for journalists and freedom of the press. Now, it's important to note that currently Julian Assange is being held in Belmarsh prison, and he's currently appealing the possibility of being extradited to the United States. If he ends up going to the United States, he would face over possibly 175 years in prison if prosecuted in the United States, standing trial in the CIA director and former U.S. Secretary of State served with a lawsuit over violations of the rights of individuals who met with Julian Assange, violating their privacy. It is yet to be seen if this will ultimately result in Mike Pompeo actually having a day in court.